Welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast, inspiring readers, writers, and nature lovers to embrace creativity and nature connection for positive well-being. I'm your host, Anna Williscroft. Join me for heartfelt conversations about transformational journeys and practical tips with fellow writers, journaling guides, and outdoor enthusiasts. Discover how writing, reading, and nature connection can help you find clarity, spark creativity, and live a more fulfilling life. Whether you're a seasoned writer, a curious beginner, or simply someone seeking a deeper connection to life, this podcast is for you. It's wonderful to have you here today. On this episode of the Writing with Purpose podcast, I'm joined by Nancy Scherlong, a writer, coach, and therapist with decades of experience in Bibliopoetry Therapy. Nancy's work explores the healing power of words and how writing can help us process emotions, overcome challenges, and foster personal growth. Whether you're new to journaling or a seasoned writer, Nancy's insights into creativity, metaphors, and the neuroscience of writing will inspire you to pick up your pen and reconnect with yourself. Okay, Nancy Scherlong from Change Your Narrative, thank you very much for joining me on the Writing with Purpose podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me, Anna.
You are more than welcome. So, Nancy, you are a writer, a coach and therapist, a journal and poetry therapist, a licensed clinical social worker in a private practice, and a wellness coach. And at the end of last year, which was 2024, you stepped down after 8 years as the president of the International Federation for Bibliopoetry Therapy. Wow, that's an impressive career and a jam-packed career as well. How on earth did you find the time?
Well, I have a bit more time now that I am not in that role any longer, but I feel like if I'm loving what I'm doing and I'm coming from a passionate place, it doesn't feel fatiguing. So when I hear you list it all, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. But in the doing of it, it feels like it has a flow and it's just my life.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I posted, I put a post out on social media this morning, and I just asked the question, what does living life mean to you? And I put in the post about how, what I work for is to be able to explore new places, new experiences, meet new people, learn about cultures, heritage, history, that sort of thing. But I don't see what I do as in work for money or the energy, sometimes not necessarily money, because I love what I do. So I understand exactly what you're saying there. We might have all of these credentials, but if we love what we're doing, it just becomes part of life.
Exactly. And I guess being on a board or being the guide of a board is a service that was an interesting, it kind of opened doors for me. And if I was nervous to do something, I'm like, well, I could do this on behalf of the organization, or let me just explore this connection and see where it goes. Or how could I elevate the work that we're doing and broaden it or make it more accessible? So being the head of an organization like that during COVID was really interesting. It was challenging at first, but it became something that I quite loved.
Yeah, something that was very fulfilling to you and the people that you served.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, they do say there is a quote. I'm not sure if it's a famous quote, but to be in service of others is what brings true fulfillment.
I like that. That sounds Mother Teresa-ish, but I wonder who said it. I agree. I feel like that's familiar, but I don't know who it is.
Yeah. So Nancy, I'd love to ask you, what is interactive bibliopoetry therapy? Because this is what you're concentrating on there, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Well, I'm glad you asked because I love to talk about this topic. It's a mouthful, and I think perhaps our field struggles with names and labels and how to describe what we do because it's very relational, but it doesn't necessarily sound quite that way from the label. I think the most important word of what you just said is interactive. Probably all of us, and I would want to hear more about you too. Probably all of us have a book or a moment that feels seminal in our development. And maybe that was our bibliotherapy, that we were reading something that was really helpful or healing. And many, many people write in a way that feels helpful or healing. But the interactive part is about working with somebody who can perhaps curate questions I might not think of for myself, or might have access to literature, whether it is poetry or fiction, that might be helpful or healing for me. And sometimes that's a librarian who's doing that work because they have such an expanse of knowledge about resources. And it might be a therapist or a coach, but the idea that a person is in this relationship with us, with books or words for a purpose that could be healing for well-being or healing for therapeutic purposes. So I don't know if that makes it make more sense, but I just think the interactive dialogue between me and the work and me and a person who's got my best interest at heart is really kind of special.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's to have almost I was going to say industry then, but I think that's the wrong word. But to have this therapy where people can really lean into that and learn more from that and be able to share that journey and just see the benefits. Because I think and this is probably more of a social construct, but reading quite often is a solitary practice, but being able to then, have that opened up a little bit more, have that interactive with somebody else or even a group, because I think part of what you do is very group focused, isn't it? In sharing within a group or on a one-to-one basis. That's something that we don't always experience. Having said that, my partner's daughter, she goes to a school, she's 10 at the moment, and they do have periods where the older children will read to the younger children and have questions that they ask, which I'd not come across that before because it was certainly nothing that was in my education particularly. If we had a
I love
text to
that.
read. Yeah, it really, I think it just creates that habit from an early age.
That's sweet. I'm trying to remember if we did that. I think we might have, when I was in like sixth grade or fifth grade in a primary school, we might have read to the kindergartners sort of as a service. And I know now in this country, I don't know what happens where you are, they're trying to do more intergenerational work at elder care homes that might be near nursery schools. So they'll have some children, if kindergarten or first grade, go read to the elderly or have the elderly read to them as part of a companion program. That's really sweet.
Yeah, that's a lovely idea. I'm sure there's some organisations that do something very similar here. I have heard of one organisation, it's a charity, and you can buddy up with an elderly person in the community who they would have either registered or they're perhaps on the radar of the local authority as being lonely or wanting some kind of support or just companionship. So yeah, a younger person can buddy up with an older person, but then I think it's up to them what they decide to do based on shared interests or hobbies, I guess.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, how can people use expressive writing techniques or these experiential methods to increase their wellness and creativity and use these techniques just to uplift them and improve where it is that they are at the moment?
Well, it's such a great question. There's so many answers to that, but my initial most common answer is I think we want to hold on to the good. And so sometimes, in the world we're living in, it's very easy to go into fear or get caught up in the negative. So I use writing to internalize the good things and hold on to them so that I have them. So for example, I might write in the present about the best vacation that I had or a moment of peace that I had with a family member. And so I have it like a snapshot, the way we would use a camera to capture that moment. And so I internalized that. And then I also use writing to externalize a problem that I wish was smaller. So I might take my worry. I was raised by a long line of worriers. So I come by that honestly and I might write out my worries. I might list them. I might make them into a character. So now I'm getting into Kay Adams' journal techniques, which I'm sure you recognize. And I might have a conversation with my worry. And then it's out here. It's not so inside. And I can feel that it's smaller or even have compassion for it as if it were another person. Because if I were talking to you and you were worried, I wouldn't judge you. I would be like, oh, how can I help? And so making the problem outside of me is very helpful, and making the resource more inside of me is very regulating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense. It's almost like those complete opposites, but then bringing them together to create a more of a harmonious balance. Yeah, I noticed the techniques. I quite like the capturing that moment and going into detail about what it was. How did you feel? Where did you feel it? Because I think that helps to keep it alive for so much longer. And then also, it's one of those things that you can look back over life and think, oh, remember that. And then, that all those feelings and things come to life because you've been able to capture it so much. Yeah, sort of emptying your head with those worries and anything negative is very cathartic in the process of doing that. But I think when you've got it on the page as well, there's so much more you can do with it then, isn't it? Reorganizing. And I did something similar because I feel a bit blocked in some places with the progression of my business at the moment. So I've been writing about, in fact, this morning we were talking before we hit the record button, weren't we, about how I'd felt a bit meh, gone outside. And that was one of the things that I was doing. I was writing about a blocked feeling, and some of the insight that I gained from that was incredible, really. And I thought, but until you do that, you almost can't then find the solution, or it takes longer to find the solution, because once it's out there, say it becomes a little bit more, what's the word? Malleable. You can bend it a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, and what you did was also so wise. Like you changed your state by changing your surroundings. So going outside, and I know you said nature matters to you. And people like Steve Jobs would say that if he was stuck, he would take a walk. And if he hadn't taken frequent breaks or frequent walks, he doesn't think he would have innovated and developed many of the things that he did. Because when we're stuck, I don't know about you, but I'll think about how I feel stuck, why I feel stuck. I wish I weren't stuck. And it's not really going anywhere except more stuck and then more upset. So you're just so brilliant that you just walked outside and you started looking at it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, often the very simple things are the things that, yeah, help to break down walls or open doors, whatever we need at the time. I think we just don't, because it takes some time to realize and be aware that actually that's what's making the change. These small little baby steps, going outside, picking up the book, asking the question, speaking to somebody about it. Those tiny little things make such a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. The willingness to shift perspective, I think, like either where we are, when we are in time, or who we are, seeing it from somebody else's point of view, all of that seems terribly helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So, Nancy, how did you come to do what you do today, your career? How did you get here?
It's such a great question. I mean, it's really, I've always been doing it. I just didn't always do it professionally. I probably started a journal at like 8, and the old fashioned ones, I don't know how old you are and you don't have to tell, but I'm 58. So, had a lock and a key. And even though it wasn't a very sturdy one, it felt like mine and it felt very private. So it was very empowering. And nobody talked to me about the power of writing. I just sort of knew that when I had something I couldn't tell somebody else, or I was trying to sort it out, or there was no one to say it to, I would write it down and I would feel better always right away. So I feel like I was naturally doing that. And then in my university studies and in high school, I was forever writing poetry. I saw my friend's yearbook the other day. She's like, look at the poems that you wrote in our yearbook. And I was like, oh, good Lord, you saved that. And they were all rhyming in those days, which is not what I write now. And then I was in graduate school for an MFA in poetry, and then my minor was psychology. So I sort of always knew that they went together. But like so many people, I was doing research and I thought I had invented this idea of therapeutic poetry. And then I found there's this organization and there's these conferences. So on one hand, maybe I was disappointed that I didn't invent it. But on the other hand, there's this community of people. And isn't that great, right? To have a bunch of folks that I could get together with. And that's the first conference I went to was 1989, I think, when I was like 20 and I was at my first conference or 21 and I haven't stopped going since. I probably missed 3 or 4 in that time.
Mm.
So that's a
Wow.
long answer to your short question. I'm sorry.
No, it's no, not at all. It's interesting to see how things evolve, from being 8 years old and having this little lockable diary. I never had a lockable diary or journal. I didn't really start until I was perhaps early teens. And then as it was more dream journaling rather than reflective writing or gratitude, I sort of evolved a little bit more in adulthood, I guess. But no, it's interesting to see how these, something happens and the trajectory of life moves forwards. Did you always think you would, I mean, 1989, did you say the first conference? So you were quite a pioneer in the field still. But yeah, did you always think that reading and writing would play a big part in your adulthood?
I mean, it's not, I can't say it's a perfectly smooth road without twists and turns. So when I was in the MFA world, I thought I would do this work as a professor, as a teacher, as a writer. So maybe I would be a visiting artist in a variety of places. And I did start worrying about the inroads for that and making a living in that way. And this is a little bit on my website, but I had a car accident, totally fine now, but at the time it was a very big deal and it was a serious injury. And it took me out of my life for a good few months. And I had a chance to contemplate. And so some of the therapies that I had to help me get past this car accident, and the person I loved the most in the hospital was the social worker, who was this really real guy who's like, the food here stinks, right? And that surgeon's bedside manner, not so good, right? And he was just real. And I thought, maybe because at the poetry therapy conferences, I met therapists as well as writers. So I thought maybe I'm going to go back to school and I'll become a therapist in addition to my writing practices. And maybe that's an easier way in. And for me, that did make a big difference. A professional identity in this country at this moment, which could always change, as a therapist is a pretty clear path. And then I became a creative therapist who added all of these other modalities that were also about helping people heal trauma because my car accident was traumatic. And I felt like, oh, now I know a lot about this just from my lived experience, which obviously isn't everyone's, but it taught me all these different methods of recovery that I didn't know about. So I got interested in helping other people with those types of techniques, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost through that lived experience, you gained this even bigger tool bag of techniques to help people. And no matter who you saw and what stage of life they were in or what they were going through, there was something in that tool bag that you'd be able to get out, with it being the therapy side or the creative side. Because I think just creativity alone can be just as powerful in some instances as the trained therapy techniques.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. And
interesting.
I was just going to say there's so much research, and I can't quote it off the top of my head, but creativity is largely about, can we have a different view or can we find our agency in a stuck situation like writer's block or after an accident? And that sort of innovation is what helps the brain stay neuroplastic and adapt and thrive, not just survive. So creativity, again, with a therapist's help or not, is really our own therapist. I think of my creativity as like my little angel on my shoulder. That's my co-pilot or my therapist. And I love that, are in a wellness system. This country is still very identified with an illness profit making system, which doesn't always ask what could create more wellness. Is the illness treated? And you can have a treated illness and still not feel well or not feel happy. So I really like using creativity in those ways to boost people's happiness level or their satisfaction or their gratitude, which are sort of outside of the domain of illness. So
Mhm.
that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right there. I'm thinking back to because I did a last year I did a master's in creative writing and wellbeing, so there was quite a lot of link from the creative side. Learned a lot about psychology as well, which I wasn't expecting, but how they link a lot of this together. And there was a lot of studies there. I mean, you've got James Penn and Baker being one of those seminal studies as far as the therapeutic writing, expressive writing is concerned. But it reminded me when you were talking about being in hospital and, the guy who was just real and how the getting to know the person who's going through some kind of trauma or some kind of illness, it it helps them on so many more levels to reach that, recovery goal, or so many steps on the recovery journey so much quicker, because they're getting to know that person as a whole, and they're not just treating the illness. There's so many more factors involved with, the life satisfaction that you mentioned there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting what you said about being the writer and then studying as a therapist afterwards. There's a University of Derby here. They've got a nature connectedness group, and they've set up what they call different nodes. So some of them are environmental, some of them are creativity and arts therapy. They've got these various nodes where people come together online initially and explore collaborations. And there was 2 people in the group that I was in a few weeks back, and both of them said that since they had studied some kind of science in addition to their arts and creativity side, so many more people paid more attention to what they were saying, just
Huh,
through having that,
interesting.
that scientific or that therapeutic addition to, the creative qualifications that they got, which I thought was really interesting. So we've still got a long way to go, I think, with this
Yes,
message.
yes, we do. And I mean, this, like not all research is created equal, and science is one way in, and even science can't explain certain things. I mean, you'll hear and read James Pennebaker say, I don't know 100% why it works, but we know these data points and we've observed these trajectories and patterns. And it seems to be something about externalizing and having a dual focus of awareness of your pain while having a vehicle to let it out, and then having some distance from it. But even the things that really work, we still don't 100% know exactly why that is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting when science can say, I'm not sure, but they're curious and they're engaged in finding out more.
Yeah. And I think we just need to trust ourselves better, that we know what's right for us in many
Yeah.
instances.
Well, and like right now, you and I are having a story conversation. So we do know that that's helpful. And Penny Baker talks about that. If people could take a disorganized moment and feel that they could tell a coherent story about it that gives meaning and makes sense, like what could have been a horrible car accident, I have a story about it that feels true to me about how it changed my life in a positive way. But it could have been only a trauma if I didn't find in it that gem or that gold or that story for myself.
Yeah, finding that one thing that changes the course of where you're going to go. And I think quite often there is those, those tragic incidents, those points of trauma that, we are on that crossroads at that point, or maybe not even a crossroads, maybe just even a fork in the road. And there's one way we can go down, and there's another way we can go down, and one will be more negative and one will be more positive. And yeah, we've just got to make that choice and live the life, hold on to the life.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned about having your little journal around about age 8. What's your earliest memory of reading or writing or both?
Oh boy, reading. Well, my mother was an avid reader. She never went to university, but she was probably the most voracious reader I've ever known. And she liked to order, I can't remember what they're called, but they were a bit fancy, first edition, sort of leather bound with very scalloped pages, thick paper. So I remember the feel of them. And she would get me a book a month. And the first one that she ever gave me was Emily Dickinson, who I did not know because we weren't reading her in school when I was 8. So I was always reading a bit ahead of where we were because of my mother. And I really liked Emily's poetry. It felt understandable, but mysterious because she uses somewhat simple language. And I loved that she broke rules of grammar, capitalizing nouns whenever she felt like it. And I could feel her loneliness, but also her desire to connect. And I think that's how I felt as a little kid. I was very shy and very nervous. And at certain points in my life, a little bit sickly. I had ear infections all the time. And in those days, they put you in the hospital to have a little surgery on your ear. So I probably had that like 8 times as a child. So I did internal things like reading and writing more than I did sports until I got
Mm.
older. But Emily Dickinson, I feel like she was my friend when I was a child.
And that's a great example there of how powerful reading is and being able to connect with the author or the characters within a fiction book, or just simply metaphor, which we'll come on to metaphors in later. But just, the metaphor of something in a book and how powerful that we can latch onto these things and it gives us meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I never read any of Emily Dickinson actually, but have you heard of Matt Haig? He's a
I don't
British
know Matt
author.
Haig. Tell me.
So he has written a lot of children's books, but he's also written some adult books, and he's had his own relationship with depression over the years. So a lot of that comes out in the characters in his books, but in his books, he's always quoting Emily Dickinson. So you mentioned
Oh, I
her
would love
there.
to read. Yeah.
The Midnight Library is a good one. It's
Okay.
very rich storytelling.
Anna. How
I
do you
can
spell his last name?
Haig.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's nice to be able to share and find new authors, I think, with the
Absolutely.
conversations. Yeah.
It's like
So
introducing each other to our friends, right? It's like, I'd like you to meet Emily Dickinson. I'd love you to meet Matt Haig.
yeah, definitely. I shall find us some more Emily Dickinson now. Let me write that down too.
I will send you a couple of poems if that's okay.
Lovely. Yes, please do. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate
Of
that.
course, of course.
Yeah. Um, Now in adulthood, what's your favourite reading activity and your favourite writing activity? And I suppose the question would be, is that to something different in your personal life and professional life?
Oh, that's a whole hour right there. How do I answer such a question? Yeah, favorite. I have trouble choosing, so I kind of choose everything. That's my strategy as an adult. I would say well, my favorite reading is probably reading in our house. We've made a library. I do feel like we live in a library, so the books let us stay there. And it's really not a house anymore. We're guests in a library. So my husband and I are doing something that might sound kind of silly, but it's from grade school where they used to call it dear time, drop everything and read. And so on a day when we're
Okay.
both busy, we'll find each other in the kitchen if we're working at home and we'll say, when are we doing dear time today? And for 20 minutes, we'll both drop everything that we're doing and we go in the library and we pick up something and we read together. And sometimes he reads out loud. If he's interested in what he's reading, he likes a lot of social science research like Malcolm Gladwell. He's a big fan of his, or he reads The Atlantic, or sometimes the New York Times. He'll find stories in there that he enjoys. And really, that's sort of a spontaneous callback to childhood, but a way to remember that I could change my day at any point just by stopping, dropping, and reading. It's like a fire drill. Stop, drop, and read.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were explaining there, I can imagine you sitting there and it's just surrounded by books and just, right, let's go.
It's amazing. It's like a play break in the middle of a workday.
Yeah, I might try that. My partner doesn't work from home very often. I do, so maybe I would have to do it as a solitary uh, habit to begin with. Encourage you to do the
Sometimes we
same
do it
thing at
on the
night.
weekend. If we're
Mm,
both gone, we'll put it at a different time. But yeah, it reminds me to make time for it because I don't always. There's so much reading in business, right? And I could feel that I've read all day, but I didn't read anything I wanted to read.
yeah,
So it's different.
um, the doing the masters for me last year really switched me back onto reading. I'd kind of lost the habit a little bit, really. Also introduced me to a lot of different genres and forms as well. We've got our local libraries here, and there's also a library app. So quite often I'll download a book as an audio file as well through the library app, and I will listen to
Oh,
that in the
cool.
car. Yeah, it just helps it makes it a little bit more accessible sometimes, particularly with
Yeah,
how much of a reading list I had. I felt that, I couldn't buy all of these books because I'd go in debt just to buy the books. So if something was available on audio through my library account, then I would download it and listen to it, as well as reading some of the additional texts.
I love that. And I'm just curious, where was your program? Was that Metanoia or where did you go for your program?
The masters?
The master's, yeah.
Yeah, it was Teesside University. So it was online. I didn't go in person. It was an online course that I had difficulty getting into it, if I'm honest, back into academia. It's been a while since I
Yeah.
was in there, and it's a whole different language that they use, isn't it? But yeah, much richer for having done it, definitely.
Yeah, I feel that way. Even though I teach in academia, I feel like some of the rigor, it's like it is like a thing you have to get into. It's a certain way of talking and thinking and delving into research and then coming out and, how do I summarize the research, but also what do I take from it and how do I make it mine? And then how do I integrate that? That's just like a whole critical thought process that if we're not engaged in university, most people are not thinking quite that way.
Yeah, yeah, and I found it quite difficult to keep to the word counts as well. I got into what it was I was doing, and I liked the creative assignments, and I did like the critical reflection assignments as well. But in particular, the critical reflection ones, I found it really difficult to stick to the word count, especially when all the footnotes needed to be included on the word count. And I thought, well, that's not part of my argument, though.
Yeah, that seems unfair, that bit. Like I would petition to not have footnotes included.
Yeah, we definitely allow for being able to explain things in a bit more detail, but you need to get your point across a little bit more. So, Nancy, we have talked a little bit about journaling already, and it was sort of journaling that would, connected us in the first place through Kathleen Adams, that
Yeah.
you've mentioned as well. So there's a lot of different journaling techniques out there, and I wondered what you would suggest to somebody who wanted to gain more from their journaling practice, but also something that might include the bibliotherapy side and the poetry side, the poetry
Hmm.
therapy, as well as having the book and the pen.
Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know that I have one answer for that. I think the biggest thing with journaling is just to not have rules because so many people will come to me and this office is full of different types of journals and they'll say, well, I'm not good at writing every day. And so they have this diary idea that it has to be daily confessional about exactly what's happening and that it's not creative. It's like a record of some sort. And I'm like, oh, no, no, we have to change that attitude first. And I think for it to be impassioned is probably the most important. So I work with some people who keep travel journals that are based out of photographs, right, of their trips. And maybe on the back of the photograph, they would write a 6-word story or a 6-word memoir, which is kind of a way of doing poetry, or it's almost like a little microwaved haiku, even smaller than a haiku. So I think just starting and experimenting with practices, like I do have the 5-minute journal, the Tim Ferriss movement, that you probably know about, which got people in business. My husband keeps a 5-minute journal. He would never have kept a traditional journal without seeing that structure of 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, being asked a couple of reflective questions that really helps him. But incorporating the poetry, there's so many online platforms where you can subscribe for a poem a day. And that's one way to get poetry into your life on a regular basis. But with Google being what it is, one thing that I do is I'll look at my morning entry and I'll circle 3 words that stick out. And then I'll Google what is a poem about? And I'll put those 3 words. And so that's how I can quickly, yeah, it's kind of cool, find a poem that I may or may not know. So I'm adding to my library, but it's also connecting to me rather than me working hard to connect to it. It's coming to me as a resonant piece about what I've already written in my journal. So I would try things like that if people are up for it. And you can always work with a person, but you could do a lot of this stuff on your own by yourself.
Yeah, I love that idea of circling 3 words and putting it in and seeing what comes back at you. I do quite often circle words in my entries. I get quite a lot of contrasting words, like black or white. It's either one or the other, and I find myself quite often, if it's more of a free write sprint, then a lot of this the opposites will come out in my writing, which is then something for me to explore. It's clearly my values and opinions versus something that I'm not aligned with at all. But I do like that. I've broken the habit a little bit, but I had a lovely square book as a Christmas present last year. And I started writing my reflection of the day, and I gave the day 1 or 2 words, word for how the day went. So I could see how, those 3 words could work using that method.
I love.
So, yeah, it's just being create, coming back to that creativity, isn't it? Finding what works for us, what opens that door for us to be able to use this as a tool for our well-being.
Yeah, and sometimes we just have to put the judge outside the door, because so many people, especially with writing, I think all the arts, but writing has so many rules in terms of how we are meant to write expositorily with emails and grammar and such. So people have been told they do it wrong or they're not good at it. And I think that can be a barrier for some. They might have been told that about art or music, but maybe they just quit doing lessons and did it on their own, but it can turn people off from writing. And so I think some of the beginning of my work with people is just reassuring them that creativity does not have rules and you can do it your way and there's nothing that's wrong. And that's a big game changer, I think, for folks.
Yeah, giving them permission that what works for you is what works. So, if we could come to metaphors, I'd love some of the wellness metaphors on your website, and the language you use, restoring creativity, wellness, and balance. And I think quite often we lose that as we age, and then we need to restore it or rediscover those things. And I think metaphors, or particularly metaphors in nature, I find that I'm drawn to, and I can look at a scene or I can see something, and then this metaphor just sort of blows up in front of me, and I gather some sort of meaning out of that. So how would you say, Nancy, that metaphors can help or improve our well-being or outlook on life?
Such a great question. That could be an hour too, right? I love this.
I'll have to
Metaphors
pencil
are.
in more time with you. Sorry, moving forward.
Yeah, I would love that. I would just love to stay in touch because we're interested in all the same things, it
Yeah.
seems. Oh, that's such a rich question. So to resonate with your nature part, I mean, I was born and raised in Colorado. I live on the East Coast now, so I'm in Connecticut, New York area. But I feel like metaphors are naturally part of the world. And they've done studies on metaphors are embedded in people's natural speech. So if you just listen to people talk and you don't ask them to use a metaphor, very often within the first couple of minutes, they will have used at least 3 or 4 because it's just in our lexicon. And what I know about the brain is metaphors are bihemispheric. So they are rooted on the left and the right side of the brain, which is integrative because they're abstract, but they're also concrete and they're language, but they always draw an image. So if I say, I feel free as a bird, you immediately see a picture. Or if I say, I was stuck in mud, you immediately see a picture or you have a visceral feeling. So it's to the point where we have learned through functional MRIs what the brain is doing at the moment that people are hearing or saying a metaphor. And some of this is in neuroscience news. I don't know if you ever follow them, but they're quite worth following. They have a channel on LinkedIn and I believe on YouTube or Facebook as well. So they're giving like little neuro nuggets about what we're learning in brain science. And so some folks who might have had a brain injury, either through a traumatic accident or a stroke or what have you, maybe they have a lessened capacity in their motor system with moving an arm or a leg. And they found that action metaphors that involve things like, gosh, now I can't think, not swam like a fish, but leaps and bounds, like words that are about action but you're not moving your body. The brain hears that, and the action center and the motor neurons in the brain get lit up just by hearing that. So they're using language as a component of brain rehabilitation because they see the connection between hearing the language and lighting up those centers of the brain. So these are things that we're just starting to really uncover. And I'm sure you know about the book that Kay wrote with Deb Ross called Your Brain on Ink, which is a lot about brain research and connecting it to writing. And there's also a book called The Psychology of Reading, which talks about what happens to us when we're receptively reading, but very active inside, and your brain on music. So you could sort of hear the trend that the arts and the neuroscience field are really working more and more together to figure out how are these practices healing and helpful, and how do they restore wellness.
Wow. That's very powerful. The neuroscience in itself is quite a young branch of science, isn't it? And
It is.
yeah, yeah, they're fascinating. Just hearing those words and lighting, and that can you imagine if more of the body is involved, how much more will light up in the brain?
Yeah, I guess that was my point. I was like, why did I tell you I was from Colorado? But here's my point. So my nervous system, wherever we're born and wherever we're from, and we have especially the first 6 years of our life, really lays the foundation for our nervous system. And it's not that we can't change it, but I think I'm helped by to live on the East Coast. My nervous system knows nature, knows being slower, and knows a simpler way of life because of where I grew up. At first, it was rattling to move here. I was 24 at that time. So I had a lot of experience being in Colorado in my body, but it's a resource that I feel like I always have because I remember what the sky looks like, or I remember what the Rocky Mountains look like, or the red dirt of the earth, or going to a river. And so I love the ocean and all kinds of things here. But if I get overwhelmed, where I go is where my nervous system knows and felt safe first, which is Colorado. So I'm so curious to stay in touch with you and learn more about the nature piece for you because it is so rich. And that is a metaphor often of how we're doing. I could look at a bird and how hard they're struggling to feed their little baby bird. And I get so lost in that. I forget about whatever my problem was. And I just look at how is nature doing it? How are they getting along? What's the order there? And it's just so helpful. But I really want to hear more from you sometime about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we'll definitely stay in touch. But yeah, I think I was on a walk last week with there's a lady that I know who she does a lot of coaching, but she does it outside. Well, when she can, because British weather isn't always great for us to go outside. And I co-led a walk with her with some journaling techniques as we were going, and it was just it was interesting that when we started, every single one of us said, we'd had a hard day, or we felt stressed, or we just felt low for some reason. And then as we got through the 2 hours or 2.5 hours that we were walking, and because we had that movement of the body, but also the stillness of the stops with the journaling prompts and just to look around and pay attention, that we're all so much more uplifted at the end of it. And, we could have started and taken on the whole day again if we'd have wanted to. But during that in particular, my comment at the end was I felt as though the trees around me had just absorbed the stresses that I arrived feeling. So that baggage that I had, yeah, just kind of took it away from me. I think we
Mm,
we do underestimate the power of nature. So as you say, up to the age of 6, however we're brought up, and how we can in times of need, if we're able to, we have that awareness to do so, that we can just almost teleport ourselves to that point in time or that environment and just, yeah, take what we need at the time.
absolutely. Well, and to your point earlier, I think when we work in a group, we can borrow each other's resources. So if I wrote about Colorado and say I shared it or talked about it, and someone else who's never been there, maybe that would live inside them in a way that's new. And now it's their resource too. And so, with isolation and the pandemic and just the stress of life, to do this work in a group is almost doubly or triply powerful because we get to benefit from each other's resources, or even just two people like us having this conversation. I could have written in my journal about this, but it wouldn't have the layers and the richness of, I'll say something and then I hear your story about it, and then it lives in me differently. And then you have something. And I just love it, feels like braiding. It's like kind of weaving or braiding things
Yeah,
together. It's beautiful.
yeah, yeah. That's a lovely way of describing, and another metaphor right there.
Well, of course, we can't help it, right?
I'll be interested now to the conversation that I have next time with my partner or a colleague, and just to pay attention to how many metaphors are being spoken.
Yeah, it's rich. And, you don't have to be exacting. It could be simile or metaphor, but the way in which we're always comparing things that are sometimes not alike at all in most ways, but alike in one way. And that's the creativity connection. We're looking at similarity and difference, and we usually look at one or the other. And I think that really pushes the integration in the nervous system and the brain as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So fascinating. So you use a lot of different techniques in your work, and in groups. I think we can all relate to how reading and writing helps. You touch on other things such as internal family systems, somatic experiencing, EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is another mouthful. What can people expect from some of these perhaps less well-known techniques? And is it something that you would have a consultation perhaps with a one-on-one client, or a group, and then sort of work out who's in that group or what they're going through, and then, you know, coming back to your toolbox of techniques again?
Yeah, such a great question. I think it goes a lot of different ways. I mean, I like consultations, 20-minute free consultation I'll offer for anything, just to find out what are people looking for? What is the service that makes the most sense? Of course, again, in this country, there's therapy for the illness piece, but there's coaching for increased wellness. So I do coaching work around the globe because I'm not limited if it's wellness work by boundaries of state and country or license issues. So there's wellness work that might incorporate talking to different parts. Like we talked about at the beginning with my worry, if I made my worry a character and she's sitting in a chair across from me and I'm talking to her, that's a lot like internal family systems, taking our little young people that live inside us and having them be outside of us so we could find out more about what they need, what are they afraid of, and what are they trying to do. Almost every part of us is trying to be helpful. It may or may not feel like it from our perspective, but my worry probably doesn't want to go so fast or wants to get my attention or is hanging on to an old story that's not true anymore because it's 1970, whatever. So sometimes we just have to update them. And the somatic stuff, I feel like the body comes into everything I do. And people don't think of writing as embodied. Sometimes they'll think about it as an intellectual activity. And I feel like that's not true for me. Once you're connecting to what you see, what you feel in your body, your emotions, your mindset, a memory, that's embodied. And so writing from that place about that place is an embodied activity. But people could write from their head only. Most of my emails are perhaps from my head only, now that I think about it. And EMDR, I do intertwine writing with that a little bit. I don't do EMDR online as much. I know you can, I just don't particularly care for it. But we do things every day that are bilateral. Like you sound like you're a walker or a hiker, or at least an outdoors person. So if you were to go on a walk with a concern on your mind and you walk for 20 minutes, you probably hold that concern very differently in your head after moving the left and right side of your body and having it on your mind. That's kind of EMDR without a person. So it's really activating the left and right side of the brain by either activating with pulsars, left and right side of your hands, or with your eyes, left and right side, looking and tracking. I mean, it's much more complex than that, but it's taking something that's stuck and thawing it out by letting the nervous system metabolize it the way if you had indigestion and you were able to take an enzyme and it helps you digest and then it moves through. It's sort of like that. If we have any repetitive feeling or thought or emotion, we're stuck and we don't want to be stuck. So how do we get unstuck? I mean, it's kind of that simple, truthfully.
Mm.
So that's a long answer to your question, but I hope I hit the points that you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. As you were explaining, I could sort of visualize aspects of that, with the internal family systems, almost like those different parts of yourself. You mentioned about the younger self. I could see a family of little mini me's who have different stages of life, and being able to communicate with those for the purposes of well-being. And yeah, I agree that, the sort of the structure that we have with language and writing is the intellectual side, but actually it does come from the body. So just being able to tap into that, and writing helps us to embody that a lot more, so that people can see that it does, it doesn't come from the head really. It comes from the heart, solar plexus, and all different places. Yeah, the EMDR. I like walking, hiking, and running. Running, it's not as easy to be able to pay attention to things with it not being as slow. But yeah, I'm always looking, left, right, up, down, honing in on something. And I think that does help to shift a lot that's going on in the brain that might be, going over the same sort of problem. And then just being able to move helps to loosen that blockage a little bit, or, just let it dissipate completely, because then the attention is on something else that's out there.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of my interpretation based on what you were saying.
Yeah, you got it. Because really, what they're finding with EMDR that helps is being aware of the difficulty, but lightly aware, and then allowing for distraction while you're aware, but you're not completely forgetting, because repression and denial don't work because we fully put it away and we quit thinking about it altogether, which just never really helps unless it's on purpose for an hour. I'm not going to think about the state of the world so I could get something done. But being lightly aware, distracted, and resourced at the same time is very, very healing, however it is that we do that.
Yeah, I like that. And it's not just saying put this in a box and never touch that again. When we're allowing other things to sort of percolate a little bit, then it's almost giving us the opportunity to see this thing that we want to put in a box in a different light, maybe see it in a
Exactly.
different approach, or I'll be able to apply something different to it.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Yay. So what's next for you, Nancy?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question, too. And I can't believe we're almost halfway through 2025. Goodness. Well, I'm doing a bunch of things as always. So I'm in a program at Columbia University. I'm doing their certificate in narrative medicine. And so I'm learning about how to use texts in a way that might be helpful to folks in healthcare environments. And my husband, actually tomorrow, is graduating from his master's in public health. He currently is an insurance guy, but that's not his heart. His heart is helping people. So he's gotten a public health degree to figure out more about ways to help communities, not just companies. And so we're doing a bit of a joint venture with healthcare stories and working with different companies and insurance carriers about helping people tell their stories of health and illness and recovery and wellness. And we'll see where that goes. And I just joined the board of the Good Listening Project. Do you know about the Good Listening Project? Do you know who they are?
I'm not sure that I do. Good
They're so
project.
cool. I'll tell you just a little bit. So what they do, they have an 8-week training where they train folks in a particular style of reflective and witnessing listening. And so if you were to tell me a story and we would put a time frame on the story and you would say what kind of poem you would hope for me to turn your story into. And then I go off and do my little notes and percolate things, a little cooking with a little magic, and I create a poem that is exactly what you told me, but in the form of a poetic device. Maybe it rhymes, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's long, maybe it uses a metaphor. I don't know. I'll have to see from your story. And then I give it to you as a gift, and you get to tweak it. You get to say, oh, I think you really got it at that first part, but I'd like this changed, or the end doesn't feel quite right. And so I go back and change it. So it's like an artist service for somebody who has a story that they don't feel has been heard, or maybe they've never told, or they would like to have a witness around. And so then I write up your origin story, which is why you want me to do this, and then the poem that we both turned it into. And it's just the coolest group of people. They work at hospitals, at health centers, at care homes with hospice, listening to people's stories and turning them in to witnessing poetry. So I'm working with them and I've joined their board. It only meets 4 times a year. That I feel like I could do because I'm not going to go straight from one board into lots and lots of work. So that's just a couple of things. There's more, but it's in the same vein of stories and healing and community work.
Yeah, both of those sound like wonderful projects. Is there any kind of anthology or, from the poems that are created from those stories? Are they?
Well, I am working on a couple of chapbooks of my own, and I am working with the Good Listening Project on taking some of the poems that I wrote in my work with their cohort and putting them into a mental health themed anthology. We don't have it yet. We're starting the ingredients of it. I had written 6 pieces that are largely about mental health and people in all different environments during COVID, teachers, a nurse, a woman whose father had dementia, and a cancer survivor, and missing somebody. But yeah, it was very interesting to do this type of witnessing because I think as artists, we're inspired by other people, but we
Yeah.
might still think of it as our story. So listening to somebody's story, remembering that it's their story and it's their poem, and I'm not going to write things that didn't happen or that they didn't say. I'm going to stick to it, but still be creative. And they get to read it because I've written lots of poems that were inspired by somebody I saw on the street, but I never gave them my poem. So it's a bit humbling as well. It's quite the process.
Yeah, humbling that they've entrusted you to be able to do that for them, but then also, what they get back as well is this polished version of their story that they potentially might not have ever come up with on their own, but then they can, you know, relive, use that, however it is that they use the end form of that. Yeah, sounds like a great pairing.
It's very cool and also humbling in the editing because this one I wrote for this woman who had a difficult birth experience. And she's like, I love it except for these 3 lines. That's not right at all. And so for her to have the power to change that and for me to be able to let go of it, that's not my poem. It's her poem. And it's a very different process than artists. I guess it's like a commissioned piece in a sense except it's a service that's not for money.
Yeah, lovely. I shall have a look at that. Is that just a Connecticut thing, or is that something that's
Oh, no, it's
international?
people all over the world, international. So if
Okay.
you look up the Good Listening Project on either LinkedIn or Facebook, you will find their page and they also have a website, but they're doing very powerful wellness work in all kinds of healthcare settings and
Mm.
schools too.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, getting in there for the youngsters too. Great. See, would never have known about that if we hadn't have had this conversation. We're sharing
Well,
wisdom.
and you too. I have about Teesside, their program, and I have Matt Haig. So I have some homework to do of my own.
Brilliant. So, where and how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, that's such a nice thing to offer. Of course, email is always good. I think you probably have it because we were chatting that way. It's my first initial, which is N, and then it's my last name, Scherlong, and then LCSW, which is licensed clinical social worker at Gmail, or my website, which might be easier to remember, which does go to my email, which is either Wellness Metaphors, that's my old domain, or Change Your Narrative Therapy, both of those. And that'll take you to Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Eventbrite and all the other things. But I really enjoy connecting with people, whether it turns into any bit of business or not. It's more about having the ability to share like we're doing right now, like share stories. And then people become friends and who knows what happens. But so many cool things have occurred over the last 10 years since video and virtual work are much more prevalent. So I welcome anybody to get in touch and I want to stay in touch with you too, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, definitely. I would love that. Thank you, Nancy. I'll pop those links in the show notes so people can see how to get in touch and work with you directly. We've covered such a lot in this episode. Is there anything else that you want to just cover as a sort of wrap up, or the one tip that you would recommend to finish on?
Yeah, I don't really have advice like that. It's very permissive advice that, we've all probably been hard enough on ourselves, and that doesn't really work. So what is a way that we could be gentle? And what is a small way to start, whatever it is that you wish to do? And if it's the one word a day, I love that. I'd love to hear more about how you liked that. But when people don't have words, there's reasons. And so it could be one word a day or one photograph a day. I have a friend who took a picture of the sunset every day for a year after her father died. And that's all she could do to document the day had passed. So whatever it is, it's not too small, just to start.
Yeah, I love that. Start east, start small, start slow,
Yeah,
in your own
yeah,
time. Take your time, and yeah, see where it might lead to.
exactly.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I feel as though I've really gotten to know you in the last hour or so, and also, learned a lot from you as well. So really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and
Oh,
thank you for
you
sharing.
too. You're awesome. I didn't know that you existed, and I'm so happy that you do.
Oh, that's lovely. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
yeah, it's true.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's Writing with Purpose podcast. Having conversations with fellow writers or adventure enthusiasts brings two of my biggest loves in life together, writing and nature connection. I've been a copywriter and content creator for 23 years, but my passion is writing for well-being, and I'm on a mission to share the benefits that putting pen to paper has for personal wellness with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about writing for your well-being and journaling techniques, please connect with me in my Facebook group, Journaling with Anna.